Uh, in the historical Holy Roman Empire, power was very decentralized, and the Holy Roman Emperor had quite a job to do to keep everything in line. How did the Holy Roman Emperors enforce their decrees in such a decentralized state? Why are there so few, if none at all, cases of the nobles getting together and just overthrowing the emperor as soon as they were dissatisfied? Is my understanding of the empire as a decentralized state accurate?
Yes, it is. And to answer your question, during the Middle Ages, the only way that the emperor was able to enforce his rule, ultimately, is if a nobleman went too far against the law, then the emperor would put him under the ban of the empire, which basically meant that any of his neighbors who felt strong enough to take his lands could.
Wow, that'll do it.
That'll do it. But the maintenance of the emperor's law was like the king's peace in the rest of Europe. It was something that everyone agreed on. You know, we've had this question before in other ways, but for instance, in medieval Europe, if somebody was playing the robber on the king's highway, then the locals would, in England anyway, raise the hue and cry, and they'd go out to get him.
Wow.
And having gotten him, they would say that the king's peace was restored.
Ah.
And this notion of the peace, the king's peace or the emperor's peace, which if you broke, you would be declared in the empire under the ban. In the rest of Europe, you would be an outlaw, outside the law, meaning that any man who could take you down was welcome to. That's because the notion of the peace was very strong, and it was not obviously bound up with immediate enforcement, because the authorities didn't have any means of enforcing the peace. The locals did.
Mm-hmm.
And they knew that if they took to arms to enforce the king's peace, they had the king's blessing. But that's a very different setup from us. With us, we do anything we can get away with that the cops don't catch up with us on.
Mm-hmm.
The idea that our neighbors and ourselves are bound to uphold the peace, that's very, very different.
Yeah.
But notice that we still have remnants of it in law.
We have neighborhood watch.
Which is a little bit like it.
Yeah.
We have the justice of the peace.
What is that exactly?
Well, it comes from medieval England, but the justice of the peace was a judge. Someone breaks the peace, you bring him up before the justice of the peace, and it's his job to mobilize locals to enforce the peace.
Ah.
But also, you know, if there's a dispute between you and your neighbor, one of you can swear out get a warrant sworn out to force your neighbor to keep the peace.
Okay.
Or you could be accused of disturbing the peace. Have you heard these phrases in law?
I mean, yeah, I have.
Well, they're all ancient, and they go back to the medieval monarchy.
Yeah.
Disturbing the peace meant disturbing the king's peace.
I see.
Keeping the peace
I've heard that.
was keeping the king's peace.
Yeah.
But the peace, which we just use now, it's just a ceremonial phrase in law.
Yeah.
But it was a real, living, vital thing
Yeah.
to our medieval ancestors. And in the Holy Roman Empire, which later on, as the other nations of Europe centralized, the Holy Roman Empire fell apart because it did not. It decentralized, if anything, even further. And the Reformation put paid to it. Although it managed to limp along, thanks to the Habsburgs having power that was not dependent purely on their authority as emperors. Nevertheless, yeah, that was...
So basically, empires never collapsed via internal fracturing.
Well, it did.
Or do they?
But it took... Well, they do. But in the case of the Holy Roman Empire, it really took the Protestant revolt.
And that did it. That was the nail in the coffin.
Yeah, but it still limped on for 2 centuries.
Okay.
They had to come through some very odd ways of doing it. So, for instance, the emperor was elected, but by the time of the Reformation and afterwards, he was always elected from the House of Habsburg. So it was quasi-hereditary, but they still went through the form of the election.
Okay.
But part of the imperial coronation, which was a big deal, which was no longer a coronation in Rome, only in Germany. Charles V was the last emperor to be crowned by the Pope. But before an emperor was crowned by the Pope, he would be crowned King of the Germans, initially in Aachen and then later in Frankfurt.
Mm.
Before that, he had to be elected. So the King of the Germans was elected emperor, and then would go to Rome to be crowned. That was the medieval thing. And often that was brought up with all sorts of problems because inevitably the Italian peninsula would be in chaos. So he wants to get crowned at Rome, which means he has to take an army to restore order long enough to get the crown.
Italian peninsula always seems to be in chaos.
Yeah, that's the Italian way. You wouldn't understand that not being Italian, but
of course.
Just think of your Italian relatives yelling at each other. Now multiply that by a whole country.
That's pretty scary.
Yeah, well, you know what I'm saying.
Yeah.
Yeah. Notice how much easier your Hungarian and Slovak cousins were?
Yeah, they're very laid back.
Yeah. Aren't they just... Oh, by the way, this is for the lady. I want you to see this. All right. Anyway,
Wow.
what?
Okay.
I can be relaxed. So, she was also thought it had a heavy meal.
Yeah.
For it. Just so you know, today's an Ember Day. I've had an almond croissant. That's it. I'll have a bigger meal later, but just so you know. And anyway, I don't know why I'm paying so much attention to her. But
and if Charles sounds a little different today, it's because he's probably getting sick. So cut him a little slack, yeah?
Yeah, boy, is sick and starving.
Yeah.
That doesn't sound good.
Yeah.
That we're almost at the end.
Thank God.
All right, but let's get out of the end. So, as I was saying, at the coronation, they had to make some sort of a deal after the Reformation with the Protestant electors. Okay, because some of them were Protestants.
Mm-hmm.
Now, like every coronation rite, a mass was a big part of the proceedings. So the Protestant electors would walk out, and they'd come back after the mass was over.
Oh, okay.
Well, this kind
yeah.
It kind of wrecks the whole point.
Yeah.
But that was what they were forced to do.
They didn't need to walk out.
Well, yeah, they did, because they didn't want to be present at the idolatrous mass. And even if they didn't care about it personally, their subjects did. And it was up to them to uphold the Protestant church. Although, and this is another one of the funny things that happened after the Reformation, not one, not two, not three, but 4 Catholic monarchs were heads of Protestant churches.
Okay. What? Wow.
King James II was the head of the Protestant Church of England. He was Catholic. After the Saxon kings converted to Catholicism in the 1730s, they were still the heads of their state church. The kings of Bavaria became the head of their Protestant church after 1815, and so did the Emperor of Austria.
And their subjects like that? Like, even though...
It wasn't a question of liking it, it was to prevent greater evil and greater... See, after the end of the 30 Years' War, Germany was tired of religious war. So they came to all kinds of accommodations from the local level up to the national. You had in different areas, depending on how the thing had worked out in that area.
Okay.
You had churches that were used by both denominations. The Catholics use it for Mass at one time on Sunday, and the Lutherans or the Calvinists on another, have a service at another time.
Did they have statues of Mary and St. Joseph?
Yeah, but they veiled them.
They veiled them?
No. Well, see, the alternative was to continue fighting.
Yeah, okay, and nobody wanted that.
Nobody wanted that, and there was no question of indifferentism because everybody knew who was Catholic and who was Protestant. Another thing that occurred, not in England, but in Germany, you had monasteries of nuns and a couple of monks that went Protestant and stayed that way up until the present day.
Okay.
So you had Protestant nuns and Protestant monks, which makes no sense.
Right.
But why should it?
Okay.
Life is like that. Remember, ladies and gentlemen, you've heard me say this time and again. It doesn't have to make sense. Once you understand that, you'll understand your neighbor a lot better. You'll understand the times you live in and the society you live in a lot better. And at the end of the day, you'll understand yourself a lot better.